Good evening. Welcome to another edition of After Dark. Tonight's subject, sex. What is it for? And with me to discuss that, I have with me Andrea Dworkin, born in New Jersey, studied literature and philosophy, and has written fiction, non-fiction, poetry, and short stories. Hers is a powerful voice in the women's movement. The paperback version of her book, Intercourse, is out this week in Britain. Germaine Greer has described it as the most shocking book any feminist has yet written. So, Andrea Dworkin, sex, what is it for?
I think you should be addressing that question to somebody with omniscience. I don't have omniscience. I'm asking questions about the relationship between intercourse and women's civil status. And why is it that women continue to be sexually subordinated to men, regardless of what social reforms we seem to be able to enact? What effect does intercourse have on our desire for freedom and for equality? Why is intercourse in a male-dominated society exactly synonymous with sex when there are so many ways that people can have pleasure that don't actually involve intercourse? And study after study has shown that for women, most other forms of sexual intimacy are actually a lot more pleasurable and fulfilling. So what I'm concerned about is, does intercourse take a lot away from women? Does it rob women of identity and of freedom and of a sense of selfhood and entitlement? And then what are the implications of that for women politically? Is it in the experience of intercourse that we learn to accept our second-class status? What does it mean that our bodies are seen socially as bodies that can be penetrated and have no social integrity? We're seen that way as a class, when male bodies, in fact, can also be penetrated, but that doesn't establish the status of men per se. I think that these are very deep questions. I think they're very important ones, and I think it's very important for the women's movement to begin to confront them. So I don't know what sex is for. I do know how sex is used against women, and that seems to me to be one of the fundamental areas in thinking about what sex is for socially.
But there is, in some of what you write, a suggestion that it's intrinsic to the act of intercourse.
I raised the question because I didn't see how to write an honest book without raising the question. It's not my belief that any of the sexual hierarchies that we now live with are inevitable or biologically determined. But I raised the question, certainly, what does it mean for women that we are penetrated? I think that you have to look at that in the context, as I try to, of the legal system. And in fact, when people think about sexual liberation, they think about all of the laws that prohibit various sex acts. And what they haven't taken into account are the laws that mandate intercourse for women in marriage, so that you have a history of women, just now talking about the West, in which women have been chattel property under secular law up through the beginning of the 20th century. And marriage is a state-enforced right of the man to have intercourse with the woman. And the question then is why? And my view is that intercourse, at least has become in this society, the most polarizing sex act as opposed to the most intimate sex act. The sex act that most means male power, that's most identified with male identity, that has the least to do with an expression of equality and reciprocity. And so I think that what I'm saying is that intercourse is a social act. I'm also saying many people feel that intercourse is a private act. I'm saying that it's not a private act, that the society of two that exists in order to have the act of intercourse is a society that's regulated by the state, that there's a social arrangement that's mandated by the state, and that has to do with making certain that women stay subservient to men.
I thoroughly agree with what Miss Dworkin says. I've read her book with interest, pleasure, but a certain amount of wonder. You have a huge bibliography there. What are these to do with your theme?
Well, the bibliography is basically the books that I read over a 5-year period while I was writing this book. And I had written a book several years ago on pornography. It's called Pornography, Men Possessing Women. And when I was writing that, I read all of the scientific literature, the social studies, the psychology, all that kind of stuff. And I basically felt that it was worthless in terms of human experience. I mean, what we really mean to each other and how things really happen, how people experience them. And I made a decision with this book that I was going to use fiction primarily as the place where people tell the truth. Now, they tell the truth that they know, but they don't necessarily tell all the truth, but they tell the truth the best they can. And so what it is, I've read other of your books as well, but those are the books that I read during the period that I was trying to understand these problems.
I understand.
In other words, what it is it's an honest bibliography. It's not one that's sort of fleshed out to make it look as if I have more knowledge than I have.
Do you think Shakespeare has anything useful to say about sex?
I think he has powerful and both inspiring and enraging things to say about it. I regard The Taming of the Shrew as one of the very great and most terrible plays. It enrages me that it makes me laugh, but it does make me laugh. I can't help it. And it's, laughing at one's own brutalization.
But you know, you
Yes, but you see, the thing is that the image of the dominant woman or the existence of the dominant woman is simply part of how male supremacy works itself out on us. I mean, if you look at, whether you're looking at culture or you're looking at the aspect of it that's purely pornographic, what you see is that the woman who is dominant, that justifies the ways in which she's punished, and it justifies the ways in which she's brutalized, so that whether she's going to passively accept this punishment or whether she's going to be an active, dynamic person, the fact of the matter is that there's a justification for using her in a way that degrades her.
I understand.
You're looking.
Oh, well, I find whoever, Shakespeare, whoever.
Oh, I agree with that. I think that one of the things that has been interesting has been the conflation of experience in real life with a search for intellectual knowledge that I think has been the hallmark of our generation. And I think that this book and all my other work is suffused with experience, but it's women's experience.
It's your experience.
Oh, it's partly my experience.
Only for yourself.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think that when writers write, they write about things that matter to great numbers of people, or ultimately the work ends up not meaning anything, which may be the case. But the fact of the matter is that if it doesn't embody the experiences of more people than one, it ends up finally, I think, being fairly useless.
Okay.
And I think the status quo is enforced with tremendous insistence. I mean, I think that change in the direction of equality is very, very hard.
What about you, Julia? You're a woman. What do you make of a view, a rather, in one sense, perhaps I'm revealing myself as a man, it's a bleak view of male sexuality, very closely identifying it with power and subjection, dominance.
I think women can be blamed just as much as men.
If they're not smiling, they're not getting their daily dose of hugs.
Well, I mean, I can tell you why I focused on it. I focused on it because I'm part of what is an international movement of women that isn't ideologically based, but that is in fact based in trying to achieve real social equality for women. And the question is, why is that so difficult to do? And part of the reason has to do with the politics of sexuality and male dominance. Now, I think that it is interesting that the minute that questions about power get raised, it is, and has always been, the sexual liberationist point of view to say that that is implicitly puritanical. In fact, what it is pretty much a taboo area for women, that we are not allowed to question these arrangements.
I don't
disagree with what either of you has said about sexuality in general. What I'm saying is that even makes the fact that you say that and that you mean that makes it even more interesting a question. Why intercourse is still the central sex act in this society, why sex is still considered to be dirty after so many years of changes in people's ways of talking about and engaging in sexuality. And I think that all of that relates to the way women are treated in the society, and that we'd have more intimacy if we had more equality.
And we should say, I'm terribly sorry about this, but we need a child. I have to insert this into that.
Intercourse as such, I mean...
is sex linked with having children?
What do you think about that?
I think that there are two areas in which it's important. First of all, number one, it's no longer true. The existence of reproductive technologies mean, in fact...
Technology, I mean, sex and technology.
Reproductive technologies where, in fact, an egg is fertilized in a...
Technology is something created, it's an artificial thing.
Yes, it is.
We're talking about a natural process.
No, but what I'm saying is that intercourse is no longer biologically inevitable to reproduce the species. We have had a change in the last 10 years because of...
Well, officially then, according to Aristotle and according to the Catholic Church, we should get rid of sex.
Well, part of what I'm suggesting is that the other reason that I think that we have to look at intercourse as a social issue and not as a biological issue is that it really never has been the case that women have had to devote their whole lives to having intercourse in order to have children, in order for the species to survive. All women have not had to do that all the time, and yet that is the social system that we have. So that these
that is the biological function, nevertheless, of women. Is it not?
Well, many of us
women
don't
have a large
think so.
biological function to fulfill, whether they like it or
agree.
not.
Yeah.
It's no good blaming men. Women have to beget children.
You can say, I think rationally and easily, that a small part of a woman's life needs to be devoted to it, and not every woman's life. All women, in fact, do not have to have children and never have had to have children. And yet that has been the legal and social imperative
Well, they're all
for women.
made for the purpose of having children, aren't they?
Well,
Made by whom?
I think the argument that you're going to offer to me that people are somehow abnormal.
No, I'm not going to offer that argument at all. I'm going to say that normal people do lots of things. They go to psychiatrists, they go to church, and they go to feminist rallies for equality. Those are all normal people. And that normal people, normal women, are very concerned about the quality of their lives. And that very frequently the quality of their lives are diminished by male dominance. And the quality of men's lives is improved by having rights over women that in fact are unfair and that are destructive of women's integrity. And that's normal. There's nothing abnormal about dealing with that realm of social reality. All kinds of normal people want to deal with it. Yeah, I just really think that for women it is not as you suggest, that this is that a concern with power is some kind of late bourgeois development in the West and has no international significance. There wouldn't be an international women's movement in every country of the world if that were the case. I think that for women, survival has always meant having obligatory relations with men, usually sexual, usually mandated by law, and that it's interesting to look at the amount of force that is required to keep those relationships existing and intact. And I think men have actually an incredible fear of what women would do if women actually had free choice in a society, what choices women would make.
But they do have free choices.
Yeah, I think that also the book Lesbian Nuns is really being mischaracterized by you, Jim. I think that the point of it isn't that there's all of this hot sex going on in convents.
I didn't say that at all. I should say that they're both dear friends of mine.
Yes,
so
you
I
did
know
say
them
that.
intimately.
You did say that. And I think that...
Excuse me?
I was just sort of explaining to Andrea that you said it during the break. So
Well, I mean, I did hear it, and I understand that, and therefore it is even more interesting to me that you don't understand how important equality is to every single woman who wrote in that book. And that part of what they were saying was that relationships with each other had a kind of equality and integrity that they couldn't find in a world where they were viewed as being lesser people. That first, the choice, in part, even to go to become a nun, had to do with this search for integrity for a great many of them. And that second, then they found that integrity with other women.
Meaning that they want their life to give their life, that's why.
Right, I'm using the word integrity to define what they were looking for.
It's a very good word.
What?
Integrity. Because you're trying integrity.
So I certainly don't feel that I'm suppressing anything.
I think it's interesting that that often I think we're using the same words, and it's almost as if we come from different cultures as men and women. I mean, we talk about sex as if our experiences of it are the same, and I think probably they're not. And sexual response in the same way. Men tend to objectify women, and sexual response tends to be tied to objectification, which is very formulaic and fetishized and, in my view, very alienated way of responding to other people. Women tend to, in this society, really want sex to be an expression of intimacy, not necessarily exclusivity, but intimacy, and often feel incredibly shortchanged by the male concentration, in fact, on intercourse, when women want a much more sensual and generalized kind of sexuality, whether with men or with women. And I think that I don't understand why it should be difficult to understand that someone would say, in a secular context, I want to be whole, but I also especially don't understand why it would be difficult to accept that a woman says that. I want to be whole. I don't want to be this part that is used in what is very often a very cold and callous and detached, very functional kind of experience.
The human experience.
Well, the thing about this is, of course, that is very hard to argue with because the words are so affirming and so deep with evocative meaning. I think that what you say is true when you say that intercourse is the one area in which men most experience themselves as men and women most as women. And when you look at what that means in the wider world, that should give you some pause about the meaning of that particular act. The thing that troubles me about what you're saying is the identification that you're making between sexual intimacy and intercourse, and really to be absolutely pedestrian about it. I mean, to leave the poetry and go to the worst kind of prose for a minute. Study after study has shown that it's usually around 7 out of 10 women do not have orgasms from intercourse in particular, much prefer other kinds of sexual intimacy. And then the question does arise, why is it that intercourse still remains for men really the only authentic sex act, that men don't feel as if they have had sex unless they have intercourse, that women comply with that wish, even though women don't have orgasms in general, in the main, from intercourse per se. And I think those are important questions.
I challenge
I don't think that's true at all. I think that...
The studies are...
I think looking back...
I think it's interesting that, for instance, in the Marquis de Sade, ejaculation is, in fact, the word that's used is always pollution. Just as a point. Yes, pollution, right. And I think that in the last chapter in my book, which is called Dirt and Death, and tries to understand why in a society run by men, sex always has this stigma of being dirty and somehow being connected with death.
It's dirty because one loses one's identity and
think,
feels ill about it.
I think that it's dirty because of the low...
I really want to challenge you because what you're describing...
The only person I'm puzzled by is you, Andrea, because insofar as you've talked about sexuality, you resort to literature or to the statistics of the surveys. But
What gets you through the night?
I mean, I'm giving away my own
What do you like doing,
background.
Andrea? Speak in the microphone here.
And take your hand away from my mouth.
But in the end, is it unfair of me to ask the extent to which much of what we say about sexuality we say about...
I'd like to get back to Andrea's book, if I may. Extremely interesting. Can we have a look at the first chapter? I was not aware until I talked to a friend of yours that you were a great admirer of Tolstoy. You deal at great length with the Kreutzer Sonata and, of course, Tolstoy's own relations with his wife. Do you think it's possible to split up, Tolstoy the genius and Tolstoy the horrible husband, like that? The man who did not know who used his wife. Is it possible to split?
I see no reason to split them up. I just want the second side acknowledged. In other words, I want to look at him as an artist and as a person, to consider what he said has value because of his greatness as an artist, and therefore because of the way it encompasses a lot of people's experience, not only his own, but then also to look at the way he used women in his personal life and the role of that exploitation in his art, how he made art, in fact, out of the ways in which he was cruel to his wife.
But I mean, in a sense, I was asking, do we do that? Are we doing that?
Well, I don't. I
wondered why you matched my question.
I'm aware all the time that I got the impression that she was dealing with two different men. She could forgive the bad husband, the fucker, the man who used his wife, because of the great work he produced.
Well, I think that, first of all, it's not for me to forgive him. It's for Sophie to forgive him.
I don't agree with Andrea. Marital happiness goes hand in hand with sexual happiness.
I didn't say that it didn't. I said women don't, in general, have an orgasm from intercourse. I didn't say that marital happiness and sexual happiness don't go together.
Well, 10% of women did not experience an orgasm.
I don't agree that anything of current political value about women came from Kinsey. I did an analysis of every book that Kinsey and the Kinsey Institute had ever published in my book on pornography, and it is extraordinary that, to give you two examples. Number one, the chapter on children that he does, the sources are entirely the notebooks of a pedophile. The sources are not children. That's number one. And number two, in all of his investigations, he found, for instance, cases where women had gotten a divorce because they were repelled by oral sex and didn't want semen ejaculated in their mouths. He never found a case of wife battery. He never found a case of marital rape. I mean, these things which are so common in the population, I think that the work is exceptionally misogynistic. I don't think it has any credibility anymore, given what we know now about women's lives.
I don't agree with that.
How about the Hike report, which came later? How much more authentic is that?
Well, I think it's much more authentic, and I don't want to get into arguments about the methodology and so on, but basically Sherheit's findings have been borne out by all the other studies that have been done. In just the most popular kind of thing that happened recently in the States, which is certainly not a scientific study. Ann Landers did a column and asked women if they liked intercourse or not. And 80% of the respondents said no, they didn't. And what they really wanted was to be able to hold the men that they cared about.
But that is...
Well, I disagree that it is something that has to do with biology. I think that the ways that the sexes...
But you're not saying that there isn't a biological dimension,
I'm saying that there isn't a rule of nature that dictates the behavior of all of us,
but it
such that we all do this and we all do that.
But with women, it's rather different. The female orgasm has no part to play in the biological process. I'm not right.
Well, I don't know if it has a part to play or not. I mean, my own view is that it's well established that women have much more sexual endurance than men, if we want to talk about biological basics, and can have multiple.
I want to hear this.
Can have multiple orgasms, and therefore the sad thing is that so few women have orgasms at all. And that, in both my view and to my knowledge, male orgasm does not have to be synonymous with ejaculation. I mean, if men made love in other ways, they would also be able to experience other kinds of orgasms. And there is a long tantric tradition of understanding that male orgasm does not have to be synonymous with ejaculation. And it's our society that's so commodity-oriented, and where sexuality is seen to be both performance and, you know, something that exists, frankly, as far as I can see, in a very narrow realm of experience, that we seem to have lost all these other possibilities for sexual pleasure. And part of what I think is that the practice of intercourse as the normal kind of sexual experience for both men and women robs both men and women of the possibilities for real intimacy outside the realm of intercourse. I really believe that.
Yes, I mean, I think you're totally right.
Yeah, well, let's speak for us now, our generation.
Well, our generation, I mean, in the sense that actually you and I are pretty much contemporaries. In my view, our generation has failed miserably to fulfill the promise of an egalitarian world in which women were not sexual tools. The sexual liberation of the 60s has ended up in what in the United States is a $10 billion a year pornography industry in which women are sold like so many pieces of dead meat. And it seems to me...
I think what one person calls pornography, another person calls erotica. We get trapped when we start using words like pornography because it's a loaded value judgment word. If we talk about erotica, whatever turns you on should be fine.
It's a long argument, but the fact of the matter is that when you have a $10 billion a year industry that's involved in selling human beings, you're not talking about mutual pleasure and reciprocity, and that there has been a failure. That is, in fact, our failure. I think we share the responsibility for it.
We opened the door, but we can't accept the responsibility for what everybody does.
We can accept the responsibility for a kind of social exploitation that we made legitimate. No. Absolutely, positively, 100%.
Tell me, why is pornography wrong?
I disagree myself.
Why
that pornography is wrong?
Because it funds organised crime, which is the continuation of capitalism.
Oh, come on. Come on.
You know that. You don't mean that.
I do.
You do? The original meaning of the word pornography.
Pornograph is a representation of an anonymous but desirable sexual partner.
No.
Actually, it's a representation.
Well, at least I'll try. I'll give you a definition.
No, the original meaning of the word is a depiction of a prostitute and a client. No. And then over the years, that's the original meaning.
No, it's actually a particular kind of prostitute.
Porne is the Greek word for a prostitute.
It's a porne. It's a certain.
It's a Greek word for a prostitute.
It's the lowest class of prostitute.
Impersonal sexual partner.
Right. It is actually a woman who was a female sexual slave.
It's the depiction
in Greek society. No, it was a woman. It was a woman, a living, live woman.
Have you read, Andrea? Have you ever read The 101 Days of Sodom by the Marquis de Sade?
Yes, as I call it, the 1,000.
Do you call that pornography? Do you call that pornography?
Yes, absolutely, I do. And there's a chapter on it in my book on pornography. And on all of the critics of Sade and the ways in which you talk about the Tolstoy, the life and the art, the ways in which those who have written about Sade have justified all of his personal abuses of both women and children as part of his genius.
But
the excuses that they have made for him.
Apparently, Sade's problem is an obvious one, isn't it? He could not get an erection.
Well, no, I think it's much more complicated than that. First of all, it's been accepted as a political text and been used as a political text by people of great conscience, including both Camus and de Beauvoir, who at one point said in an interview with a feminist that she thought that her essay on Sade was the worst thing she had ever done in her life, and I tend to agree with her. And so it's the values of Sade that have infused themselves into political discourse.
And with some regard, has it ever yet aroused anybody to sexual desire?
Well, we know that it has aroused people in that there have been murders modeled on Sade, in which Sade has been used. Well, we're talking about the Moors murders.
See, we had the Moors murders. Brady said he'd read Justine, and that he might well have been influenced by it.
But Anthony, you're asking a question we can't answer then.
No, well, you see, Lady Snow, Pamela Hansford Johnson, wrote a book called On Iniquity at that time, in which she said if we could ensure that one further child would not be molested, raped, murdered, by ridding the world of all its existing literature, we should do this.
Well, that's not quite what she said. She was talking about the exceptionally debasing effect of this kind of pornography on society, and she wasn't talking about literature in general. And she was saying that, in fact, the Moors murders, which was what her subject was, challenging some of our basic premises about the value of liberalism in Western civilization, the same way that George Steiner writes about Auschwitz and listening to Beethoven.
I
mean, the same questions.
Who used to murder women and drink their blood?
No, we have a book that, in fact, was published here in England because we can't get it published in the United States, called Pornography and Sexual Violence, which are the hearings that were held in Minneapolis, which is a very progressive city in the United States, at the end of 1983, in which a great many women and men testify as to the role of pornography in sexual violence that occurred against them. And there's a testimony of all the social authorities, meaning the experimental psychologists who have tested its effect on people in laboratories, and clinical psychologists who work with sex offenders and know the role that pornography has played in the sex offenses that they've committed. And actually the evidence is overwhelming. And I think the thing that is important to remember here is that, yes, one can talk about these endless anomalies, but then at the point when we're talking about pornography now, we are talking about a legitimized social institution and its impact on a whole class of people. And at least in the United States, women are in the midst of trying to endure and survive and resist an epidemic of sexual violence that seems to be related to the growth of the pornography industry. And I also find it very strange, I must say, as a writer. I mean, I believe that books do change people. I think people learn from books. I think their behavior changes. So I don't think it's possible to believe that people only change towards the good. I mean, I think you can learn a great many things in every direction from books.
Life changes people. Everything changes people. What doesn't?
Well, I think that the word pornography actually does mean the graphic depiction of these women who were, in fact, female sexual slaves. And I think that pornography has always been tied up with women's status. And, if I may say, I find this really very difficult to listen to. I am remembering a picture that I saw in Suck, in which an Asian woman was having a huge bottle inserted into her ass. Now, I want to know what is erotic about that, and I want to know who that woman is and where she is and what's happening to her. When Penthouse publishes pictures of Asian women being lynched and hung up like dead meat, I want to know, how dare you tell me that that doesn't have to do with exploitation and pain and the status of women and using women as commodities and legitimizing violence against women. And when Playboy goes on to use women as bunnies and Penthouse uses women as pets, what do you mean that that has nothing to do with our human standing and our human status? Of course it does, and we call that pornography. And you don't. And that's what's important, that the place of equality in sexuality is what has been missing from the male view of what sexuality is.
I think there's a whole range of issues here which we are ignoring. The breast, the bottom, rubber, all sorts of things. But I think sadomasochism can be very destructive.
So can sex.
I think there are two sides to this.
Sadomasochism can be very good sex as
One
well.
is the problem when you distinguish in the way that you have between normal and pathological. The first problem is the rights of the sexual minorities that you're characterizing as pathological. But the second side of it is that in a world where, and I only know the figures in the United States, but in a world where a woman is beaten every 18 seconds and a woman is raped every 3 minutes, and it has been impossible to distinguish the rapist from the normal man in any kind of way that would identify the rapist per se. And the only time you can identify him is once he's in jail, and it seems to be exceptional carelessness on his part that gets him into jail. The question is that when forced sex is such a common experience for women, what does normal and pathological mean in that context?
I think a great deal. I think what...
At the beginning of the 20th century, we stopped being chattel. At some point along the way, we got a certain amount of control over our reproductive capacities, and that in the world in which we have some moderate elements of choice and freedom, now there is this monstrous epidemic. And I think it is a devastation to us.
What other answers
yes,
you
but
come
you
up
see,
with?
I'm saying if you ask a false question, you will get a false
Is
answer.
that a false question?
I
What
think
is sex
so,
for at the end of the
because
day is a
think-
false question.
I think that partly sex has been for the ownership and possession of women and children, and that procreation is the euphemism that is used. And in fact, there have been at various times technologies of contraception that have been available to women that are not 20th century technologies of contraception. For instance, in the culture of the witches during the Middle Ages and the Reformation, and in fact that those cultures were wiped out because of wiped out by active social persecution because of the autonomy that those contraceptive strategies gave women. And so I think that it's a euphemism that covers an important social reality to say that we had intercourse so that we could procreate.
Absolutely rubbish.
There was a transitional moment in the history of women, in fact, when puerperal fever became epidemic because doctors who before had not been at the attendance when women gave birth didn't wash their hands. I mean, there is an argument that when childbirth was in the hands of women and midwifery was a widespread practice and institution, the situation of women was in fact different with respect to reproduction. I mean, it's not a matter of what happens when you always link politics to intercourse or to sexuality. It's a question of people's lives.
What is sex for? It need not be for that, as I think we began that way.
In fact,
sex is for pleasure.
Sex is pleasure.
I mean, I find it hard to understand why you thought I was evading your question, because I think that by saying that that women have been owned, one is saying women have been owned for the purposes of procreation.
That's what sex was for.
Well, that is what sex was for, and that is how this institution of intercourse developed as the primary expression of what is considered normal sexuality.
The institution of intercourse. Can you really say that? I mean, you're making it totally a political matter. It's ceasing to be a natural thing at all.
No, what I tried to do, I mean, actually what I tried to do in the book was to use the work of writers to get at the experience of what intercourse was. So, I mean, here in a sense, yes, you're right, this discussion is somewhat reductive. I think the experience is very important. But if one were to say sex is for pleasure, which is something that I would say, then I think that you have to begin to ask the questions about why women's pleasure hasn't been a very important part of what sex has been in this society. There's no doubt that it hasn't been.
Or is the pleasure served in something deeper?
I wrote about a lot of male writers in this book, because what I tried to do in the first part of it was to talk about the various kinds of experience that intercourse was, and the ways in which men that I thought had tremendous value, both as writers and as human beings, had seen it. So that, for instance, if you look at the work of the Japanese writer, contemporary Japanese writer, Kobo Abe, he talks about sexual intercourse and sex in general as being an experience of an absolute ending of all boundaries, as if you don't have any skin left anymore. He talks about it as a form of total obsession. James Baldwin, whom I wrote about, talks about intercourse and sex in general as the ultimate test of self-knowledge, of what you are prepared to face in the world. That the only possibility for human tenderness or human intimacy is if you are brave enough to know yourself in the world that you live in, and if not, sex will be brutal. Tennessee Williams talks about being marked by sex, almost as if you have a kind of stigma inside that lights you up from inside, so that everyone can see that you're your life is devoted to this experience and you're socially defined by it. And Isaac Bashevis Singer talks about sex as being essentially an act of possession, both material and supernatural possession. And I think that we have gotten, to my ear, exceptionally reductive. I think that that's a much broader range of deep and authentic human experience.
But, Andrea, if I may say this, you had a thesis. I certainly felt, as a male, insufficient, probably even unclean. Did you mean that?
I didn't mean anything exactly that specific and exactly that narrow.
Not meant to make purges on
but what I did want people to do was to face the reality, first of all, that this experience has incredible impact on women's struggle for freedom. That's number one.
Yes, welfare.
It's not. You're right. It's not a polemic.
No.
It's an effort to really investigate the experience of intercourse outside the realm of sexology.
But you dealt at such length with a couple of homosexual writers.
Well, I dealt with intercourse, the act, whether it was homosexual or heterosexual. And
you make no distinction between those two?
Well, the only distinction that I make in the book is where the law makes a distinction, and I explain the distinctions that the law makes. But it seems to me that one of the reasons many people have said to me that the chapter on Baldwin is the chapter that offers them the most hope in terms of communication and intimacy is because he is dealing with social equals. I mean, at least most of the time, equals in terms of gender. And I think that he has a great deal to say about men and women as well, because of his incredible experience of the meaning of racism.
Well, Jimmy Baldwin had a lot to say, and of course
they can compete professionally with men.
I think that what I have done has been to say, here is an area of human experience that everyone presumes to know and understand. And if we women want equality, we have to face the fact that movement after movement of of egalitarian agitation has been pushed back and suppressed. Now why? Yes, let's look at the politics of economics, but let's also look at the politics of sexuality. And in particular, it seems to me that you sort of need to answer this question, at least for me. Why is it that law mandates intercourse as an act for women exactly through the period when women are chattel to men? And I think that we have to deal with the fact that intercourse is and has become and has been one of the main expressions of the ways in which men own women. And if what we want is more sexual equality, then we have to deal with what intercourse does to us.
But I would
not at all.
say, I mean, psychologically,
Not at all.
I think your thesis is absolutely psychologically unsound.
I hope so, because my respect for psychology is not very great because of the impact of psychology exactly on trying to deal with questions of women's inferiority and with psychology's role in trying to reconcile women to accepting a subordinate status in society. So I hope that it is not part of it.
But certainly as a man,
I think women should have better manners.
Good morning, and thank you for being with us.